Finally is earned here, not the casually deployed finally of impatience, the finally of someone who has watched a long, resistant, extensively defended process arrive, after considerable time and considerable interior pressure, at a threshold that the process has been approaching for longer than either person fully registered while the approaching was happening. The seeing that is occurring now, if it is occurring, and the evidence examined across these pieces suggests that in cases of genuine connection and genuine silence it often does, is not the quick, convenient seeing of someone who has been waiting to see. It is the hard-won, arrived at against resistance, took the full weight of your silence to produce seeing of someone whose defenses against the seeing were formidable and whose defenses are now, under the specific pressure of your specific silence, beginning to fail. The failure of the defenses against the seeing is not comfortable for the avoidant. The seeing is not the clean, cathartic, and now everything is clear quality of sudden self-knowledge arriving as relief. It is the specific, uncomfortable management cannot prevent this quality of someone whose most carefully maintained self-protective structures are being undermined from the inside by the weight of evidence that the silence has accumulated and that the interior, operating on its own timeline and its own logic, can no longer accommodate within the comfortable versions of the story the avoidant has been telling. Your silence did this, not deliberately. The silence that produces this seeing is the silence examined in the genuine no-contact pieces, the silence that arrives from the honest, depleted, finally arrived at completion place of someone who has stopped reaching, not the silence deployed as a strategy to produce the avoidant's self-examination. The silence that is simply the natural sound of someone who has genuinely redirected. The irony examined throughout these pieces is that the genuine silence, the one not organized around the avoidance response, is the only silence with sufficient weight to produce the seeing. The strategic silence, organized around producing this effect, is detected by the monitoring system and processed within the management's existing frameworks. The genuine silence is not detectable by the monitoring system in the ordinary way because it is not directed at the avoidant. And what the monitoring system cannot detect through its ordinary channels must be processed through the interior's own mechanisms. And the interior's own mechanisms, processing the genuine silence, arrive at the seeing. The seeing happens in stages, not the simultaneous all-at-once clarity of a sudden revelation. The gradual, accumulative, one layer at a time quality of someone whose defenses are failing in sequence rather than altogether. The first layer to fail is the relief narrative, the narrative that the silence in its early period was accommodated within, the story that the no contact was the natural resolution of a connection that had reached its conclusion, that the absence was the comfortable settling of something that had been requiring management into the quiet of something that no longer does. This narrative fails first because it fails fastest, because the relief that the narrative predicted, the genuine settling into the undisturbed equilibrium of a management system that no longer has the intimacy, pressure of your presence to manage against, does not arrive on the predicted timeline. The equilibrium that was supposed to arrive keeps not arriving. The quiet that was supposed to feel like peace keeps feeling like something else. And the narrative, predicting peace and encountering something else, begins to show the strain of accommodating a prediction that is not being confirmed. The second layer to fail is the comparative reassurance, the narrative that subsequent connections would demonstrate that what was lost, while genuinely significant, was not uniquely irreplaceable, that the specific quality of the connection with you was present in the world in sufficient supply that the loss, while felt, would be addressed by the ordinary progression of a functional person moving forward through their social and relational world. This narrative fails when the comparative diminishment piece's reality begins to accumulate, when the monitoring system keeps processing subsequent encounters and keeps producing the same reading. This is not the same. The quality is not the same. The specific configuration of perception and depth and groundedness that the genuine article reading was produced by in you is not being reproduced by the world's ordinary supply of available connections. The narrative of comparative reassurance fails under this accumulation. And in its failure, the next layer of the seeing becomes accessible. The third layer is the one where the seeing actually begins. The layers before it were the failures of the comfortable narratives that were preventing the seeing from being necessary. The third layer is the seeing itself, the specific, honest, finally accessible, because the comfortable narratives have failed quality of someone who is now, without the protection of the relief narrative and the comparative reassurance narrative, encountering the interior's own honest accounting of what happened. What the interior's honest accounting says, arriving in the pieces and increments that the management's failing, but not failed authority still permits, is something the management was most specifically installed to prevent from being said. It says the pattern is the cause. Not the circumstances, not the timing, not the incompatibility or the neutral operation of two people's different configurations. The pattern, the specific, recurring, reliably producing the same outcomes pattern that has been the primary operational force in every significant relational engagement of the avoidant's adult life. The pattern that withdrew when closeness reached the threshold. That created distance when genuine meeting was required. That managed the other person's caring as intimacy pressure rather than receiving it as the gift it was. That chose the management's comfort over the connection's flourishing in every moment where the two were in competition. This pattern is what produced the loss, not the circumstances, the pattern, and the seeing of the pattern as the cause, not the intellectual acknowledgement of the pattern's existence, which has been available to the avoidant for considerably longer than the genuine seeing, but the full, weighted, consequence-connected, this is what I have been doing, and this is what it has produced seeing, is the specific, uncomfortable. Management cannot prevent this interior event that your silence has finally made possible. Why does the silence make it possible when other things did not? Your presence, the caring, the patience, the generous extension of yourself in the direction of the connection, was paradoxically one of the things that prevented the seeing, not because your presence was wrong, because your presence provided the management system with something to manage against that was not the pattern itself. The management was occupied with you, with the processing of your orientation toward the avoidant, with the calibration of the distance in response to the intimacy pressure your investment represented, with the continuous resource-consuming work of keeping the connection at the level the management's protocols prescribed. The management was busy. With you. In your absence, the management's primary occupation is gone, and the management, no longer occupied with the processing of your presence, has nothing to manage against except its own interior. The interior that has been generating the evidence of the pattern's costs. The interior that has been carrying the loss weight and the comparative diminishment and the specific, honest, too late reckoning with what the pattern produced. The management, with nothing external to manage against, turns toward the interior's content. And the interior's content in the full, honest, unmanaged against quality of someone whose management system is now primarily engaged with the interior rather than with external intimacy pressure. The interior's content is the seeing. The pattern is visible from the inside of the silence in a way that it was not visible from the inside of the dynamic. Because the dynamic was the pattern in operation, the pattern producing its outputs in response to the inputs your presence represented, and the pattern in operation is not the same as the pattern observed. The pattern in operation is experienced as reasonable, situational, appropriate to the circumstances behavior by the avoidant who is inside it. The pattern observed from the specific outside the dynamic vantage point that your silence has created is recognizable as the pattern, as the thing that keeps producing the same outcomes regardless of the specific circumstances that vary between iterations. The seeing from the outside the dynamic vantage point is the first genuine seeing the avoidant has had of the pattern as a pattern rather than as a series of situational responses, and it is your silence, your genuine, complete, not organized around the avoidant silence, that created the vantage point. The seeing, once it has begun, does not stop neatly at a comfortable threshold. This is one of its most significant qualities and one of the most consequential things about this stage for what follows. The seeing, once the comfortable narratives have failed sufficiently to allow it to begin, has a momentum that the management's failing authority cannot easily reverse. Each layer of the seeing that arrives makes the previous comfortable narrative less available, makes the reinstallation of the relief narrative or the comparative reassurance narrative more expensive than it was before, because the seeing's honest content is now part of what the narrative has to accommodate. The management can still slow the seeing, can still, through the various narrative reconstructions and redirections and the deployment of the compensatory mechanisms examined in the hidden suffering pieces, prevent the seeing from reaching its fullest and most honest form in any single sitting. But the seeing does not go away. What has been seen cannot be entirely unseen. The honest accounting that the silence made possible has begun, and the beginning of it has altered the interior landscape in the specific, small but permanent way of a thing that, once noticed, is noticed. The pattern has been seen, not fully, not with the management is entirely offline, nothing is being protected any more quality of the most thorough internal reckoning, but seen. In the honest hours, in the comparison's accumulation, in the interior's own processing of what the silence is revealing about what the dynamic was and what produced it. The seeing is beginning. Your silence made it possible. What the avoidant does with the seeing is the question that the seeing's arrival opens but does not answer. The seeing is the beginning of the possibility of change. It is not the change. The full journey from the seeing to the genuine, sustained, behaviorally evident change that the earlier pieces on healing and on what genuine return requires examined is a long and specific and internally demanding journey that the seeing only begins. Some avoidants who arrive at the seeing go further, who take the honest accounting that the silence made possible and pursue it through the therapeutic work, through the genuine reckoning with the pattern's costs, through the specific, sustained, against the management's preference effort of becoming someone whose relational behavior is governed by the adult's choosing rather than by the fear's management. Some avoidants do this work, not quickly, not linearly, with reversals and resistances and the specific, imperfect, long arc quality of genuine change, but they do it. Other avoidants arrive at the seeing and, through the continued operation of the management's reconstructed authority, install the seeing within a new, more sophisticated version of the comfortable narrative. Not the old narrative, that narrative is no longer fully available, but a new one. One that acknowledges the pattern's existence and even its costs without requiring the full, identity-level reckoning that genuine change demands. One that allows the avoidant to say, I understand the pattern and continue living by its authority. Your silence does not determine which of these paths the avoidant takes. Nothing you do determines this. It is the avoidant's own work, in their own interior, on their own timeline, motivated by their own genuine engagement with the full weight of what the seeing reveals. What your silence determines is the arrival of the seeing, the path from the seeing, that is theirs. Your silence produced something the presence never could. The vantage point outside the dynamic, the space in which the pattern's operation became visible to the person whose operation it was. The honest interior accounting that the management was too occupied with your presence to allow to surface. The seeing, not as a gift you gave the avoidant, not as the intended consequence of a silence designed to produce it, as the natural, structural, honest result of someone who stopped being available to be managed against and left the avoidance management system with nothing to manage against except the interior evidence of everything the management had been producing. The silence produced the seeing. The seeing is the avoidance work to do something with, and you, in the genuine, complete, fully inhabited life that the silence was always really about, have already done yours.